I'm going to add here a directory where I'm going to add several of the components that we're going to be building throughout. Right? I'm going to put in here under a directory called views all everything that will be consumed by a human being. Right? So all the HTML is going to be here. All the CSS is going to be here. And any interactions that the user might generate by clicking and dragging is also going to be handled by the view. So under the views, there's going to be several views under here, right? There's going to be all the login page, registration, profile. You're dealing with all our domain objects. Our domain objects in this case are the websites, the pages, the widgets, right? All those are the domain objects that we're dealing with our assignment. And we're going to collect these into different directories. So for instance, we'll put all the interaction, all the views that that we need for the dealing with the user, like login, registration, and profile. We'll put them under views. All the interactions that we need to handle websites, maybe lists of websites, editing websites, creating new websites. We'll put it under website. We'll put everything that has to do with pages under page, and everything that we need to do with widgets, we'll put it under widget. It's a nice way to organize yourself, right? Typically, you can organize it either as a taxonomy. You come up with what are all the things of interest in the application. So this I'm using a taxonomy organization, right? Or you can also look at it, organize it by feature. What kind of feature it is, right? So if it's a chat, right, or if it's be able to do a blog, right, or if you have or a wiki, or if these are features, this might also be a directory structure that you might want to use here to put all the components that deal with that particular feature, right? Again, it's a way of organizing yourself to deal with the complexity of the application. All right, so let's start with the user. Let's create a couple of components that we'll need to deal with the user. And we know that we need at least 3 components, right? We need to be able to have them log in, have them register, and have them edit their profile or view their profile. So we'll put all of them under here. So let's start with creating a simple login component under the user directory. Let's stop this, the terminal. Let's stop this for a second, and let's see where we are. We'll go into source, we'll go into the app, we'll go onto the views, and we'll go into the user. And in here, we're going to create our first component, the login component, right? So we'll say ng generate a component for login. So it creates login, and it's very convenient that command. So there it is. It created our login component that has all the 4 main pieces of a component. It has the HTML part. This is what the user is going to see, right? Also the CSS that goes along with it. It also has the logical part of this, right? The TS, right? And so it creates a component here. There it is, which is already has some of the boilerplate things that you would do anyway if you were doing this by hand. Certainly, you could do this by hand. Right? You can type this all yourself. There's no need to use the tool, right? But after doing it a couple hundred times, you see that they're all the same, right? So might as well just automate that. So here we are importing other classes, right? The component class, the onInit class from a package, the Angular core package. We're using the component to decorate our class. Here we have just a plain old class. This is a plain old class, right? In the same way you would expect this to be a Java class or a .NET class, right? You have properties, you have methods in here that you can make them public, private, right? You can implement an interface. All the things you could expect from a full-blown, mature programming language, object-oriented language. Okay, it has a constructor. You can overload, override everything that you could expect for a full-blown object-oriented language. Okay, that typically you could do it in JavaScript, but you would have to do a lot of infrastructure for JavaScript to truly behave like a mature object-oriented language. Okay, so this is obviously all this is compiled into these 4 lines of code in TypeScript compiles to dozens of JavaScript lines of code, right, or transpile into. But we don't see that. That's low level for us. Anyway, here this export keyword means that this can then be imported by others, right? It makes it into a self-contained module, right? Any variables that you declare in here are stay within this namespace. Even if you don't put var in front of it or you don't put any descriptor in front of it, it is self-contained inside of this module. Also, it binds this component decorator, right? Aspect-oriented programming, right? Which we take for granted in Java and .NET. That we say, oh, this is a service, this is a data source, this is a whatever, right? And we are using aspect-oriented programming in Java. Again, using also @ sign. So we have full-blown aspect-oriented programming here as well. We are saying that this is a component. It's an Angular component because it's a component that we're importing from the Angular core. So this is an Angular component, meaning this has a special meaning. Right? It's interpreted within the Angular infrastructure. It means that this is going to provide data for HTML, and they're going to be bound. Whatever happens to HTML, this class will know it. Whatever happens in the class, the HTML will know it. They're bound. Right? They're all part of the same thing. That this is a selector, meaning that I have just created a tag, an HTML tag, and that is how it would appear in the DOM. Right? So for instance, if I take this selector and I go to my top level component, my hello world here, right? It's still rendering as hello, I believe. No? Let's see. Is it still hello 1 2 3? Oh, my server's not running. Where am I? Just enter serve. Okay, there's hello, my hello 1 2 3. So yeah, so we're there, right? That is the file. If I replace this, notice that it's gone, nothing there. But if I use my app login, I have created a brand new HTML tag that wasn't there originally, and it says just login works. Okay, login works. This app login, if I click on it, it's this component, right? Notice the IDE is all connected. I click on that tag, and it comes to this component. It's this component that implements that tag, and this is how it knows that tag is mapped to this component, right? So when the browser looks at this, it says, "What the heck is this? What is this app-login?" I don't know how to interpret it. Angular will come back later, parse the DOM, will find this tag, yes, and will say, "Okay, is there any component that implements this?" It finds this component, and says, "Ah, it's you. Okay, you're implementing it." And what it'll do is that it will tie it to this HTML. If we click on the HTML, we'll notice that there is our login works. Okay, which is part of the whole of these 4 files. All these 4 files work together. Okay, the TS declares any data that is feeding it, whereas the HTML is the actual HTML. If you remember, last week we were using jQuery to dynamically generate the DOM. Remember that? Right? And it was very tedious having to concatenate strings, right? And it was very error prone, right? I could mess up, right? Generating one language from another language, it's very, very tedious, right? It's very, very error prone, okay? Ideally, you would be generating that dynamically from the language itself. Okay, so if you're going to generate dynamic HTML, ideally you would be doing it here, not in JavaScript. okay, which using plain old JavaScript and plain old jQuery, that's what you'd be doing, right? You would be doing a lot of generation of dynamic content from JavaScript. So this framework tries to separate the two. It says, no. Everything that you dynamically generate in HTML, do it in HTML, in the DOM. Okay? Don't do it in JavaScript. Okay? In JavaScript, you should never, ever see any HTML code. Okay? It should never be there. Okay, so obviously we can change this, right? We can say, we can change this to be h1 login. And this would be injected into login. Not that we want to see the login page right now, but let's implement it real quick. Let's see. We can have here an input. Before we go there, let's see how these are tied to one another. We can create data on the component side, and any data that the component has can be referenced from the HTML. So if I declare here a hello, I declare as a string, and I say hello from the component. Okay. It doesn't like double quotes. Okay. Yes. Where do I? Oh, it's all part of the it's all part of the bootstrap of the component. The component itself internally generates all that JavaScript. If you look at the actual source code, notice that at the bottom, right, it adds all this extra JavaScript that we didn't add. It wasn't there originally. If you look at the index page, it's not there. Where is it? The index page only has this. It has no references to Angular whatsoever, right? It is injected afterwards, right? The index page itself is injected with additional JavaScript vendor bundles, styles bundles, polyfills, inline bundles, main bundle. All that includes all the Angular code in there. I'm sorry? Yeah, no, the starting point is always this app component right here. This app component right here. This is where the bootstrap happens, right? It loads the app component, right? The top level HTML that loads everything else. Okay. The module declares the app component right here, which is our app component, right? That loads right here, and so this is the starting point that loads everything else. Yeah. No longer do you have like in Angular 1 that you have to explicitly load the libraries, explicitly load all the CSS. No, all that is gone. Right? All that has been abstracted. All that, it's becoming a framework, right? A higher level of abstraction. Yep. All right. So we're let's close that. Let's close that. And let's close this. So here's login, and the component just my component just declare a hello, right? And this hello is now available in my login component by escaping it and just referring to that variable that is declared in the component, right? So there it is. So hello from the component, right? So any variable that I declare inside of the component is also available on the template, right? And vice versa. If I declare variables on the HTML, right, like input fields, for instance, right, I declare they are also now available on the component side, right? Right. So let's do a couple things here. Let's create an input field here, input, and this might have a placeholder, Alice, and this would be maybe your username. Maybe this is a label, and this is it says username. And here we might have a label, password, and the input field, the placeholder might be gibberish. And let's close that. And maybe a button that says login. Okay, there it is. And presumably these should be of the correct types. So this is type password. All right. Okay, there we go. So we have our simple login page. Presumably we would want to have also a registration page. The registration page probably is very similar to the login page. So let's create a component for that as well. So let's stop this for a second. So we could, where are we? Let's see, user. So we can say ng generate component register. And I'm going to copy most of the content. Notice that there's register, right? I'm going to copy most of the copy. And I'm going to copy into the HTML for the register page. There it is. I'm only going to change a couple things here. This is going to be register. And password, there'll be probably 2 passwords. And validate password. And if we look at the component side of the register component, we'll see that its selector is right here, app register. See that? Meaning that I could, from my top level HTML, I could replace this app login. Notice that it's still rendering login. I could change this to be dot register. Notice that I have type ahead, right? The IDE connects directly to the Angular framework, right? And notice that now I have, doesn't work. Wait, what? Oh, my server is not running. Okay, this is register, right? Which is more or less the same thing, right? Labels for username, password, validate. But notice that they all map to the root. Okay, they're all mapped to the root. Okay, what we would like to be able to do is navigate either to one component or the other component, right? Depending on some routing logic, right? But again, this is a single page application. We're not going to use the same techniques that we looked at earlier, where we just have a hyperlink, right, that points to the HTML. We have an HTML, right? We have HTMLs, and we would be tempted to have hyperlinks here that navigate from one to the other, right? If you're in a login page and you have a hyperlink that goes to the HTML, for instance, if I want to register, or instead of logging in, I want to say A and I want to say register. Right, I would be tempted to do this, href, right, and point to the HTML where the registration page is. Right, but that would defeat the purpose of a single page application. We don't want to leave the single page. This href would actually navigate me away, right, and take me somewhere else. Right, I don't want to do that. Right, we want to be a little bit higher abstraction. So how do we do this? How do we do routing? So okay, so to do routing, right, meaning we don't want the default mechanism for routing. How do we do it? So here we created several components: register, login, register, profile. Okay, so first of all, we need to be able to configure the routing, right? And we're going to borrow an idea that, again, from these very mature infrastructures. They have come with a great idea. Okay, if you've used Spring MVC, or if you've used struts, or if you use any of these infrastructures, right? What they do is that they centralize the navigation into a set of components that are responsible for the navigation, right? Regular navigation looks something like this, right? You have multiple pages, and each page might have hyperlinks to other pages. So this page might have a hyperlink to that page, and to this page over here, and then this one has hyperlinks over there, and maybe over here, and this one over there, and that one over there. After a while, right, trying to understand, who goes to where when, right, it starts to become a mess, right? This has almost the same negative impact of using just plain old go-tos, right, in a programming language, right, that you can arbitrarily just jump anywhere you want, right, leave wherever you are, right, and all of a sudden just go somewhere else, okay? That has all the side effects, right, of being able. It's very, very hard to debug. It's very hard to follow what the logic is, right? If you could just arbitrarily jump around, right, it just makes it so much hard to maintain and to develop. So instead, we've gone through several other ways, other infrastructures, other constructs that deal with not using go-tos, right? So the equivalence of not using these hyperlinks in other infrastructures is to centralize this mechanism. Instead of spreading the control across so many artifacts, right? If you have hundreds of pages and each page has 10 links, right? You're talking about many different paths, right? If you want to maintain that, because you want to add maybe an additional page, right? Additional path in here, just modifying it, you have to go and visit I don't know how many other pages, right? That have the dependencies with the path. Make sense? Right. So instead of spreading the control across so many different artifacts, we look to centralize that into a central controller. Right? A central controller where now the pages are no longer the pages no longer know where they should go. The navigation is no longer their responsibility. Right? Instead, they notify a centralized controller of the intent of the user. What is it the user wants to do? Oh, they want to check out, right? Or they want to add something to the cart. They want to view their billing. They want to check out their orders. Those are the intents, right? But it is not the page's responsibility to decide where to go, right? They only notify some central controller as saying, hey, this is what the user wants to do, right? But it's not my responsibility to do it. The central controller will decide, says, oh, okay, depending on certain business logic, this is where you should go. Okay? And this has become a very, very popular implementation across multiple infrastructure. Okay? Certainly, Struts follows this. J2EE, Spring MVC does this. And you configure this navigation control by providing some kind of configuration file, either in XML form or JSON form or some format, right? That explains if you're here and this happens, this is what should happen. If else, everywhere. And they usually have some kind of IDE that you can graphically, drag and drop, right, and move things around, arrows that allow you to edit this in a graphical format. Yes? Make sense? Right. So no longer the pages are going to be responsible for navigation. Again, this falls into the larger philosophy of areas of concern. Right? What is the concern of each one of these components? Right? The HTML is not going to have the concern of navigation. All right? All right, awesome. Okay, so how do we actually implement this centralized controller and this configuration? Right? So how do we do that? All right, so what we're going to do is that we're going to create an additional file here that is going to be responsible for the routing, that centralized controller, right? So we'll call it app routing. A new TypeScript, we'll call it app.routing.ts. So it's just a plain old TypeScript class, right? And it's going to import a couple of things in here. Okay? It's first going to import the routing module from Angular, the Angular router. Okay, and this is the module that implements all this mechanism, this centralization of routing. Right. It also is going to load the components that you want to navigate between. I want to be able to navigate between the login component and the registration component, and vice versa. Right? I want to be able to go from one to the other. Right, so I'll need the login component. Well, let's import it. So import the login component. No, really? It's not declared? Don't you see it? Is it declared? It is. Why don't you see it? Huh. Login. Maybe if I type slow. No. Oh, thank you. There we go. Yeah, so it loaded it, it found where it is, and then it loaded it. Excellent. And then we're going to import also the registration component. Okay, it loaded it. And my IDE is set so that it doesn't like double quotes. I'll change that later. That's annoying. Okay, there we go. All right, so now we're going to implement the actual routes. Okay, these, right? The encoding that if I am here and this happens, then I should do this, right? The encoding of this, where I was and where I'm going, right? We're going to refer to those as routes. Okay, and here we're going to implement a couple of routes. We're going to say that. Here's my variable. It's a constant. It's not going to change. If you see the following route in the URL, this is where you should go. You should display whatever the login component was displaying. And what is the login component displaying? An H1 with a login, a couple of input fields, and a button. Yes. But instead, if instead you see register, right? You should instead display the register component. Okay, so we've configured this, and one more thing, we're going to export it. We're going to use the app routes, right, to configure the router module. And we're going to export it as a constant variable routing that can then be imported, right, elsewhere. Okay? All right. There we go. So once we have that, we can then register the routes with the remaining infrastructure. From the top level module, the application module, the top level module, we're going to declare our routing. We're going to declare our routing from our app module. We'll declare it here. There it is. We loaded it. And then we are going to import it so that it's available all throughout. Routing. All right. I think that's it. Right? Oh no, one more thing. We need to now go into the HTML. This HTML, we were using it to specifically only display either the registration page, right, or display the login page, right, by the component, by showing either the app register or the login register, right, or the app login. Yes. Instead, what we want to be able to do here is say, no, don't display one or the other, right? Display, well, whatever the route says. Right? If the route says login, then I like for this to be app login. If instead it shows /register, then it should show the register component. Yes. So to do that, we're going to, instead here, we're going to declare a router outlet, meaning when it sees that route, right, on the HTML, on the URL, this is where things are going to be injected, right? So either the login component is going to be injected here, or the registration component, right, or any of the other ones that we're going to be using throughout the course. Okay. All right, router outlet. Okay, so I think we're set. Now, if I do a login, notice that it shows the login page, right? Or if I do the register, right, it loads the register, right, without actually leaving the page, right? Notice that we have not left the index page. Okay, notice that if we do a network, okay, notice that it loads, and if I do login, notice that it goes out to the server. To fetch the HTML, but it's not actually throwing away the DOM and just replacing it entirely. Okay. All right, so it's basically behaving the way it would have behaved anyway, right? If we were to access directly the HTML. Yes. So now we have a mechanism that basically behaves the same way the old way used to work, but inside of a single. Inside of an SPA, single page application. Make sense? All right. We could, outside of the router, create hyperlinks so that we could navigate to any one of these. We could say A, right? And instead of the href, because href would actually navigate away, which we don't want to do that, we can use an attribute called router link of where is it we would like to go if we click on this particular hyperlink. Right? We can say that we want to go to /login, where this maps to this right here. Right? Notice that we're not telling it that we want to go to login.component.html. Right? It's not an actual file that I'm referencing. Instead, I am notifying the centralized controller of the intent. Right? They want to see the login page. I don't know where it is. It is not my business to know where it is. Right? It is the business of the centralized controller to know where it is. Okay? So this login, then I can say I want to go login, or I want to have the register. Right? So there it is. So we have links at the top, right? And underneath we have the outlet, right? So I can click on login or register, and it allows me to navigate between the two, right? So it's behaving exactly like we would expect, right? But again, using this, all these new considerations, right? Of single page application, having a centralized controller, right? And staying true to the MVC design pattern. Everybody okay? Yes? All right, awesome. All right, so let's keep going. We like to be able to have navigate also to the profile page. So let's create the profile page. Before we go on to the next big section, let's create the profile page real quick. So let's stop this, and let's see, we are in ng generate component profile. And the profile page, right now, it's very simple, right? The HTML in there just says profile works. Instead, let's change it to say h1 profile. Okay. And we'll add it to the routing. So if we go to the routing, we'll say that I'm going to load the profile component, and there it is. Oops, forgot the quote. And we'll say that that if we see the following path, we see profile here, okay, we'll display the profile component. Okay. Oops. Oh, and let's add to the component top level, we'll add a hyperlink that allows us to navigate to the profile, and this goes to the profile. All right, and let's restart this. Okay, register, and now we can log in, register, and profile. All right? All right, awesome. So the next thing is while we're in the login page, we want to be able to validate, right? And say that, hey, this person is trying to log in. Is this person a real person? Are they have they been already registered? And if so, we would like to navigate to the profile. We'll do that after we come back from a break, okay?